listening to The Few Podcast with Benji Buck.
Hey, and welcome to The Few. I'm your host, Benji Buck. And this podcast exists for one reason, and that's to challenge and encourage Gen Z Christians to live with uncompromising Bible study and unshakable faith in a world that's more interested in vibes than truth. We're going to kick off a mini-series on something that's way too familiar for many of us. And some of you are dealing with it right now, and that's loneliness. Let's be real. You can be surrounded by people, scrolling endlessly, posting, liking, replying, and still feel completely sick. I've been there, and odds are so have you. But listen, this first episode isn't just about the ache of being lonely. It's about where our calling fits into that ache, and it's about how Jesus looked out at a crowd and didn't see numbers. He saw need. And then he dropped one of the boldest lines in all of Scripture. So grab your coffee or keep your hands on those steering wheels if you're driving, and let's talk about what it means to be one of the few.
Stay tuned for more of The Few Podcast.
Before we get too far into this episode, just wanted to stop here real quick and say thank you for being part of some of our very first episodes. And if you haven't done so already, go ahead and hit the subscribe button. We're trying something new here and want you to be part of it.
Let's start our episode by looking at where the podcast got its name. And that's Matthew chapter 9. And jump on down to verse 36. We'll look at 36, 37, and 38. Now check this out. It says here that when Jesus saw the crowds, he had compassion. They're described as people who've been harassed. They're helpless. They're like sheep without a shepherd. He then turns to his disciples and he makes this statement. The harvest is plenteous, but the laborers are few. And then he goes on to urge the disciples to pray that the Lord of the harvest will send forth laborers into his harvest. Now let's slow that down. Jesus looks at the crowd. He feels compassion, and that's where this conversation begins. Not with anger or frustration, not even with strategy. Compassion. The Greek word used here literally means to be moved in your gut. So if you feel lonely today, know this. God isn't annoyed at your ache. He meets you with gut-wrenching compassion. And here's the plot twist. He doesn't then go and tell his disciples, hey, look at all these people. Now, go make friends with everybody. No, he says the harvest is ready and the laborers are pretty slim. They're few. Well, let's be honest here. Jesus was kind of trending. By Matthew 9, he stood before a large crowd and delivered the Sermon on the Mount. These are the red letters in Matthew chapter 5, 6, and 7. At this moment, right here in Matthew chapter 9, the crowd was coming into the synagogue because they wanted to hear him. His name was buzzing. But just in a few chapters, guess what? The same crowds that are listening now will be rejecting. The same synagogues that invited him in will shut him out. Jesus knew that his popularity wasn't permanent. God does not promise us popularity or status in our Christian journey. Actually, he promises us something narrow. Back in the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew chapter 7, verses 13 and 14, Jesus says to enter through the narrow gate. He says there's an easier, broader road that more likely fits the crowds, but this road leads to destruction. He then says, use the small gate, the narrow road that leads to life, and only a few find it. There it is again, our word, our name, few. Few choose this path. Few say yes to obedience when it's hard. Few pick surrender over applause. But if you're listening to this, you might be one of the few. Well, let's talk a little bit more about this calling, because sometimes we get stuck thinking, well, I'm not a preacher. I don't have this platform. I'm not doing missions in Africa. What's my role in all this? Well, here's the good news. Jesus doesn't say to everybody, I want you to go out and this is the one job everyone needs to feel. No, he says, his command here is a lot simpler. It's pray earnestly to the Lord of the harvest that he sends forth laborers into the harvest. Some of us are going to be the hands out in the field, and some of us will be on our knees in intercession. But we're all called to carry the same compassion that Jesus showed. Paul Tripp once said, you can't minister to a broken world with a detached heart. If your heart feels cold towards people, if you're numb, start your prayer here. God, help me recognize that people are lost and they do not have a relationship with you. Over the next few episodes, we're going to unpack this loneliness thing. Next week, actually, we're going to talk about how God has designed us to need other people, not in a clingy or codependent way, but in a deep biblical way. Then we'll explore how we sometimes feel lonely because we don't understand what relationships were meant to be. Spoiler alert, Instagram followers and prayer partners, not the same thing. And then we'll wrap up this series with one of the most comforting truths ever, and that's how God fills them. Because no one gets us like he does. I agree with John Eldridge when he says, only God is big enough to fill your soul. So I think we come here to the end of our episodes, and we're going to ask this question, what's the move? What's the action I need to take? So here's the move. Here's the challenge for this week. Pray with gutsy honesty. Don't pretend you're not alone. Don't pretend you've got nothing to give. Ask God to give you his compassion, the kind Jesus felt when he saw that crowd. Ask him to give you eyes to see who needs hope and courage to be the one of the few. Hey, big changes start small, y'all. Just start. Well, that's it for this episode of The Few. Remember, uncompromising Bible study leads to unshakable faith. If this has helped you, send it to a friend. Don't miss out on next week as we dive deeper into how God built you for a connection. Until then, stay bold, stay faithful, stay one of the few.
Thanks for joining us, and be sure to subscribe to The Few Podcast. You're listening to The Few Podcast with Benji Buck.